frequency was needed and important in the time frame that it was placed. So it wasn't a superiority complex thing, it was a cooperation thing. In the ancient days, the races that had smaller DNA templates loved the races, the Magi races, because the Magi held for them the knowledge that they couldn't hold in their own body. And the Magi loved them and would treat them very well. They were never mistreated. There was a love that went between them. So these are the basic 5 races. We have Rama. Here's the last ones that came out of the 5 Palladia Urtek cloisters. The Rama races. That was the U race plus the race. They are keepers of the gold-violet flame. They had 24, sometimes 25 to 27 DNA strand templates. These still qualify. These would be indigo type 2 in contemporary terms. These would be indigo type 1s. They're coming back on the planet now because we're in a stellar activation cycle. That's why for the last 100 years, slowly, the indigo children that you hear about in the New Age movement, they have been coming in. This is who they are. They're the consciousness that was there. But as we go along, we're going to learn something really cool about the fact that they're not as much strangers as we think they are. Okay? We can go on to the next slide. This is where it starts to get fun. The cycle of the rounds, the evolutionary divine blueprint of this race, of the Palladia races. Seeding 3, we had the 5 Palladia races came in. But it was part of a bigger pattern. The seeding 312 tribes, they were seeded on Earth in 4 different interconnected time cycles, each one with a set of different types of DNA templates. They were all seeded at the same time. Now, if we remember what we talked about a little bit yesterday, time is simultaneous. That means they're there in their time vector right now. We're here in our time vector. They're interconnected. We are a part of this, and they are a part of what we're doing in our society now. Now, the evolutionary cycle of the rounds, it was the secret of the rounds that has been hidden here for thousands and thousands of years. Because what the rounds were understanding how the planetary grids worked, how the stargates worked, and how the DNA worked with them, and how beings could interlink across time bands to bring in frequency, to create a certain effect. The effect was called the planetary Christos realignment. It was a mission about anchoring in the planetary grids the planet's own D12 Christos template that had been damaged in the fall from Tara. Now that fall from Tara is talked about in the Secrets of Amente book. That will be out soon for anybody who hasn't seen it, but I don't like to go over stuff because a lot of people are familiar with that already and I want to bore you to death. But anyway, the planetary grids were damaged. This is where we get into our mission. This cycle of the rounds evolutionary blueprint wasn't a haphazard, let's throw some people down there and see what they do. We agreed to come in on a commission that would help restore the natural alignment of the fire letter sequences in Earth's planetary grids. Just like DNA templates, manifestation templates are built on fire letters, which are consolidated points of frequency. They're little frequency areas that hold very specific combinations of frequency into alignment, which creates the basic pattern upon which matter can manifest. Everything has fire letter sequences. Every biological form, every matter form. If you would look at it from a higher dimensional level, you would see it as an energy form. And if you looked into what structures are in that energy form, you would find little symbol codes. They look like symbols to your mind. What they are is mathematical encodings that are telling the wave bands, the frequency wave bands, how to cross through each other and how to interact with each other. They're controlling the rates of vibration and oscillation in energy patterns. So fire letters are the key element that forms the structure of matter. The planetary grids are composed of fire letters. There is a certain sequence of fire letters, 12-dimensional levels of fire letters, that the planet's supposed to function on when it's in alignment with its Christos template. If a planet comes out of alignment with its Christos template, what that means is it can't process the frequencies from the higher dimensional fields anymore. If it gets cut off, if the grids can't process more than D9 fire letters, you won't be able to get more than 9th dimensional frequency in there. That means you won't be able to have a Christed being walking around the planet, because a Christed being is a 12-dimensional being. When a planet gets in that condition, it's called being cut off from the grid. And unless it is reattached to its primal life force currents, it will become a finite planet, and so will the life fields on it. Because it won't be able to receive the light fields coming down from the Kira primal light fields. It won't be able to receive the sound frequencies coming down from the primal sound fields. These are the currents of perpetual consciousness that circulate through the time matrix all the time. But if a being or a planet can't pull those currents in anymore because there's a blockage in its own template, it progressively starts to lose energy because it can't have the natural flow anymore. And this happens on a planetary level eventually. It takes billions of years for it to happen. But eventually, the planet feeds on itself, where it begins to grow more dense and more dense and more dense, and eventually it implodes, and it becomes a black hole. And every time a black hole like that is made in the universal structure, it takes energy and throws it someplace else. That means the whole universal structure is affected to the point where it has a blockage now. It's not just the planet that's blocked. It's what used to be the planet that's not there anymore is now a hole that energy falls through. So it can cause a major problem if you have a time matrix with 4 universes in it and you have a whole bunch of planets turning into black holes. You're going to lose the energy out of that universe. It's going to go someplace else in a disharmonic, chaotic form. And you're going to lose the life field in the time matrix. It will not be able to sustain life anymore. So when a planet gets in trouble like that, there are the guardian races, the Brenau from Density 5, and a group called the they call them Ascended Masters, but that term is horribly abused in the New Age movement, so I prefer their term that they call themselves, which is Janus. And it means of the Unisai, really, and the Unisai is the word they use for the central point, the one consciousness. That's their word for God. It doesn't matter what you call God, but they call themselves the Janus. They are beings that are stations of consciousness that never come into manifestation. They sustain the primal sound fields, and the primal sound fields are consciousness, and it is the consciousness of the Janus that gives the primal sound fields consciousness. So they are like the first expressions of Source, and they are like cosmic consciousness. When a time matrix or a planetary system gets in trouble, to the point where it's going to be jeopardizing other systems as well, there are teams sent in on the repair work. There are teams sent in to put it back to its natural primal order so the perpetual life cycle can continue. The human race was created as one of those teams. In fact, we were created to replace the original team, the Azarites that were created. The Azarites were created 250 billion years ago, and they got very tired. They were the same Ascended Masters coming into manifestation, serving as the galactic police. And they got really tired with it. And they decided, let's have a new life wave come in of ones who Ascended Masters who want to come into flesh, and we'll take over, and we'll create a race form that will have even more advantages as far as the frequencies it can hold and the planetary systems it can go into. This is where humans, the decision to make humans was created. That's where we ended up with crossing the Azarites with the Anahazi to make the Oraphim, to get the Turanisium out of them, to get us. So we were created with a very sacred mission. Had to do with this planet, but also had to do with guarding the universal stargates, the 12 dimensions of the universal stargates. Okay, now, back to the evolutionary rounds, because you're going to hear this a lot, the cycle of the rounds. And when I say that, I hope it'll jump in your mind, oh yeah, that's the evolutionary blueprint, the race evolutionary blueprint, because that's really all it is. It's not some big mysterious thing. But the cycle of the rounds are fascinating because it's an intertime connection that we have with 3 other rounds of evolution. They're aware of us. We're not aware of them yet. But we're in a stellar activation cycle when the timelines cross over each other and the timelines blend. This is when we can open to each other. And there may be a time, if things don't get rough here, when we'll actually be able to meet some of them. The funniest part is we'll be meeting ourselves. You know how you hear about reincarnation? Well, it puts a whole new twist on it if you take that and the concept of simultaneous time, all in the same boat. That means, wait a minute, I'm born and I die, but then I don't come back? No, it means you're born in several different places at once, and there is the possibility of, if those time vectors come together, you could actually meet yourself. And you would be looking at yourself, and you would look different than you do here. But you would be able to recognize, oh, that's us, yeah, that's us. We may have the opportunity to do that if things go well. We may be able to meet some of the races, some of the Palladia races, They were seated here in 798,000 BC because their time vector is still there. Time is a very interesting thing. It appears to move backwards and forwards, but it doesn't. It really just sits still. It's our consciousness that moves through it. The patterns of identity that are imbued in time are eternal. While we are here, our other selves will be here too. It gets a little tricky to try to even conceptualize it in a linear frame. That's why when I try to teach people a little bit about time, about how to get out of the linear focus, it helps to try things like astral projection. Or try to remember dreams when you find yourself in this kind of strange time space where it's larger. You just feel like your awareness is expanded, and time works a little different. Like you might find yourself dreaming 4 dreams all at the same time and standing back and going, yeah, I'm doing this, aren't I? This is more the real nature of time. Now, I'm not going to get into a heavy thing on time right now because it will just be confusing, and it will take us out of where I want to go with this. Because what I want to do, before we have to leave tonight, I want to take you through some fascinating information that has to do with the 12 tribes. I want to expose a little trickery that's been done to this race and why it's been done. And I want to give what they gave me. I spent all night last night doing, because they finally gave it to me. These names, there are names, 12 names of 12 tribes that were the original names. The names are very important, and I won't tell you why yet, but we'll get to that. The importance has to do with sound and what sound does to DNA. And we'll come back to this now, and we'll get back to the tribal shield, because that's where that's going. The evolutionary rounds, we are round 4. We are part of what is round 4. Now, oh, by the way, these things, you don't have to read them all. If you are interested in this, we'll have them as a chart pack by tomorrow, but because it was just, given to us last night. We hadn't have time. I would have been 3 more hours late if I waited at Kinko's. So this is available if you want it. Can I see the other one? This, God bless my husband, because he pasted this up for me yesterday. And this one.
I'm sure to use that.
That was a lot of work. And it wouldn't be here if he hadn't helped. Okay. This, the cycle of the rounds for seeding 3. Remember, we're seeding 3 because the other 2 got wiped out. Now, over here, let me straighten it out just a little. Making me dizzy. Looking at it there. A little straighter. I know. Okay. Now, we have round 1. We talked about a little bit, the 5 Palladia Urtite cloister races. Their cycle ran from 798,000 BC to 208,216 BC. Now, if you follow the linear track of time, something did happen to them, except the place before it happened, they're still there. That's where we're going to be able to intersect with them. Now, what happened to the Palladia races in their linear vector was there was an attack made by Draconian races during a stellar activation cycle. And they came in to try to raid the stargates. And they partially got control of the grids. And these races were not wiped out, but they were taken off planet in evac. So were most other things, because the Guardian races were going to come in to try to secure the stargates, and they knew it was going to make it roll if they tried to shut the stargates. But if they didn't, the Draconian forces were going to raid all the way up the density levels and get control of the time matrix. So the Palladia races had a little problem. Once the dust had settled here, they could no longer live on the planet, because you need a planet to be a breatharian, full breatharian. You have to be on a planet that can run the D12 frequency, which is the Maharata current, because that's what sustained them. They could bring in enough frequency, the prematter liquid light, that it sustained their bodies. The grids got closed down to what's called a 10-code pulse. Now, the Maharata, when it runs through the grids, that would be called a 12-code pulse, a 12-dimensional frequency being able to run through the grids. 10-code pulse cut it off. 2 of the frequencies that are normally supposed to come in could not come in. The 8th dimensional frequency and the 12th were cut out. The breatharians couldn't live on the planet anymore, so they had to be put someplace else than they were. Now, the next one that came in were called the 5 Urtite cloister races. We lost the word Palladia, so these are just Urtite cloister races. They were seated back here, 208,100 BC. So that it didn't take them too long to get the grids restabilized that time, to put the races back on. But the Urtite cloister races, they came out of the Palladia races, but there were genetic adjustments made to them. The adjustments were so they could live on a 10-code planet, which means they had to have a biology that was capable of eating. Because if you can't bring in the Maharata current, you're not going to be able to self-sustain. You're going to consume some